from the simplest microorganisms to insects and humans. Every single living being follows a basic, unbreakable biological rule. You are born, you grow, you age, and eventually you die. That is the rule, until one species decided to completely ignore it. You might think I am talking about some obscure microscopic bacterium hiding out in the middle of the earth, but I am not. I am talking about the common lobster. But hold on, erase everything you think you know, because the internet has been lying to you. You have probably heard the viral myth that lobsters are biologically immortal, that they live forever. But the truth about how they actually die is infinitely darker. It is straight out of a claustrophobic psychological horror movie. Think about aging for a second. In most animals, aging is essentially a built-in self-destruct sequence. Cells divide, they wear down, and eventually they just stop working. Muscles weaken, organs slow down, and the entire biological machine winds down. Picture Scarface, the legendary lion of the Masai Mara. In his prime, he was a beast who took down over 400 hyenas and killed more than 130 rival male lions. He was an absolute unit. But in his final days, he was slow, frail, and clearly worn down by time. That visible, tragic decline is exactly what we call aging. Now flip the script. A 90-year-old grandpa lobster does not get weak. He does not get slow. In fact, a 90-year-old lobster could effortlessly destroy a young one in a fight. Let that sink in for a moment. They do not get weaker. Researchers who were studying these creatures started losing their minds when they noticed a terrifying pattern. Older lobsters did not seem weaker than younger ones, and in fact, many older lobsters were drastically larger, significantly stronger, and vastly more fertile. They never slow down. Biology is supposed to degrade, but lobsters possess a literal cheat code. The secret is an enzyme called telomerase. In you, me, and almost every other animal, this enzyme's activity shuts down when we reach adulthood, and the aging process instantly takes over. Let me explain it simply. Every single time your cells divide, the tips of your DNA strands, which are called telomeres, get shorter. Think of them exactly like the plastic tips of your shoelaces. Once those tips wear out, the shoelace completely unravels. The cell cannot divide anymore, leading to cell damage and eventually death. But the lobster? Its shoelaces never fray. Telomerase keeps those tips perfectly intact. Their cells keep dividing cleanly and efficiently for their entire lives. There is no breakdown, no DNA fraying, and absolutely no slow crawl towards cellular death, which leads to a terrifying conclusion. From a biological standpoint, their bodies do not age like ours do. Their fertility does not drop, their organs do not shut down, and they cannot actually die of old age, without predators, without disease, and assuming they avoid ending up on a dinner plate on a Friday night. Lobsters could theoretically live forever, so why do they not? If they have the ultimate biological superpower, why are the oceans not filled with ancient million-year-old lobsters? Because the universe has a strict speed limit, and physics always collects its debts. Lobsters actually cement their own dark fate because of one fatal physical flaw. They are encased in a hard outer shell called an exoskeleton. It is brilliant for stopping predator attacks and physical damage. But here is the horrific catch. That shell is entirely dead tissue. The lobster cannot grow inside it. To get bigger, it must rip its entire living body out of its old skeleton in a grueling, agonizing process called molting. Imagine wearing a suit of armor made of solid steel. Now imagine you never stop growing. The only way to survive is to literally shatter the steel from the inside out. Molting is like taking off an incredibly tight suit just to grow a new, bigger one underneath. And the stakes for survival are insanely high from the very beginning. During this molting process is actually the only time lobsters can mate, because the female's shell is soft. A mature female will release around 100,000 eggs into the ocean as a drifting cloud of life, but less than 1% of them will actually survive. Most are eaten by predators or swept away by the currents. The rare few that survive this brutal beginning are the ones that unlock this never-ending growth. And because their cells never stop repairing, they never stop growing. Let me put this insane scale into perspective. A 50-year-old lobster can stretch over 70 centimeters in length and weigh more than 20 pounds. That means it is 600 times longer and a staggering 1 million times heavier than the day it was born. If a human baby grew at the exact same exponential rate as a lobster, by the time you turned 50 years old, you would be nearly 1,000 feet tall. You would weigh over 3,000 tons. You would literally be heavier than a commercial passenger jet. Keeping a biological machine of that gargantuan size alive is mathematically impossible. And this is exactly where the immortality myth becomes an absolute nightmare. At a certain point, the lobster's massive size becomes physically impossible to maintain. The process of molting demands a monumental, terrifying amount of energy. The bigger the lobster gets, the thicker the shell becomes, making it incredibly tough to break free. When they are young, they rip off their biological straitjackets several times a year. But when they reach 50, 70, or 100 years old, the energy demands absolutely skyrocket. It can take them years just to prepare their bodies for a single, desperate molt. The risk of failure climbs with every single attempt. And then, the inevitable happens. They reach the breaking point. The immortal lobster becomes entirely too drained to strip off its armor. It is not a choice. They do not decide to give up. Their biology is still screaming at them to grow, but the physical shell around them turns into an inescapable cage. Eventually, the next molt simply never comes. The lobster's body stalls right at the absolute edge of the process, too exhausted to go through with it. Without a fresh shell, they are completely trapped inside a shrinking, rigid, unyielding frame. Technically, they are still alive, but they can no longer grow. They cannot move properly, and they become intensely vulnerable to stress, infection, and total collapse from within. This is the exact moment their immortality betrays them. They do not die with a dramatic crash or some epic, cinematic ocean battle. What kills them is a slow, creeping failure of function. Because they are trapped in a dead shell, shell disease creeps in. Their muscles begin to deteriorate, and their massive internal organs are strained under the intense pressure of a body that desperately wants to expand but physically cannot. Autopsies of these massive, ancient wild lobsters reveal internal damage you would never see in a young, prime lobster. It is as if their biological infrastructure is ready to live forever, but the physical structure collapses right on top of it. Despite this brutal reality, there are rare outliers that push this physical limit to the extreme. In 1977, a fisherman pulled an absolute monster out of the freezing depths off the coast of Nova Scotia, Canada. This beast weighed 44.4 pounds and measured over 3.5 feet long. This was not just a crustacean. This was a biological tank, wrapped in thick armor and armed with massive, crushing claws. Scientists estimated this incredible creature was at least 100 years old. But do not let the impressive age fool you. These ancient giants are not majestic sea warriors. They are walking tragedies. When you look closely, they are literally falling apart. Crumbling tanks held together purely by habit and luck. They show signs of severe wear, scarred shells, missing limbs, and heavily calcified joints. Some are so exhausted that they can barely lift their own claws. Every giant lobster at this size is living on borrowed time, one failed molt away from a suffocating end. Take the famous case of George. George was a colossal lobster caught near Newfoundland and briefly held in a seafood restaurant in New York. Experts guessed he was around 140 years old. After public outcry, George was saved and released back into the ocean. People cheered. They thought they gave an immortal king his kingdom back. But marine biologists knew the truth. George's massive size and extreme age meant he was already nearing the natural end of the road. A creature of his scale simply cannot muster the energy to molt successfully again. And without a fresh shell, his time was running out. So yes, lobsters can grow to massive, nightmarish proportions. It is true they can live well over a century. But the harsh truth of the ocean is this: the bigger they get, the closer they are to collapse. In the wild, the average lifespan is only around 31 years for males and 54 years for females. This is the haunting irony of their so-called biological immortality. They do not age out, they max out. Sooner or later, the system breaks, because nothing in this universe escapes the laws of physics. Even the most remarkable, genetically perfect creatures are bound by one simple, brutal rule. If you cannot molt, you cannot live. Think suffocating inside your own shrinking skeleton is the most brutal death in the sea. Thank you for watching. Do not forget to hit that subscribe button to join us as we explore the darkest, most terrifying secrets hiding at the bottom of the ocean.